7 Hungarians hijacked a plane in 1956 and made their way over the Iron Curtain into safety. And for a long time, people thought it was the first ever plane hijacking, but that's not true. There were other plane hijackings by military or of military planes. This was the first commercial plane hijacking by civilians. So this plane hijacking took place on July 13th of 1956, and right before, in the end of June and early July, there were protests and demonstrations and riots in Poland. And because of all of those protests, people behind the Iron Curtain in all of the Eastern Bloc countries thought maybe we can get freedom too, because the Soviet Union actually granted Poland some of the freedoms that they were asking for during the riots. So by that time, the Hungarians had been living underneath communist thumb for 11 years, and they were not a fan of it, and they wanted out. At the time of the hijacking in July, there were still landmines and a wire fence all the way around the border. There were landmines, like tens of thousands of landmines planted in like the no man's land areas in between Hungary and Austria, where there was border disputes. And then after this plane hijacking, the puppet government of Hungary and Austria disputed the land and then decided whose land was whose, and then they removed the wire fence and all of the landmines after this escape. And because they removed all of the landmines and the fence, it was much easier for the 200,000 refugees to leave just a few months later. So a 25-year-old workman named Frank Izsák and his wife Anais and their co-conspirator George, it doesn't give a last name, but they all planned this escape. And here they are. So this plan was risky as fuck, and it would have been so dumb if it didn't work out for them. You can pause to read this New York Times article if you want. Izsák actually wrote a memoir about his experience, Free for All to Freedom. So the plane took off from Gwar, which is near the Austrian-Hungarian border, and I don't remember where it was actually supposed to be going, but it wasn't going to a free Western country because that was forbidden, or at least heavily restricted, especially for civilians. So it was not going to, say, Switzerland or West Germany, which is where they wanted to go. There were 15 passengers, including the 7 escapees, 4 crew members, and a KGB agent who was not on the flight log. So of course, Hungary and the Soviet Union called those people defectors, but they were refugees. They were trying to get out of communist rule and get to freedom. That's a refugee. So they break into the cockpit after the takeoff from Gwar, and they're greeted with the KGB agent who has a pistol pointed straight at them. But the pistol jams and it wouldn't work. And so they just started beating each other up. The hijackers had like wrenches. That's what they were equipped with, and they just started smashing everybody's heads, and it was a bloody mess. Anais broke her leg in 2 places. They finally got control of the plane, and they were flying it over the Alps, which are dangerous to fly over when you don't know how to fly, and when it's cloudy, and when the plane couldn't fly over 10,000 feet in elevation because there was a crack in the door, so they couldn't fly very high. And during the scuffle, the plane started to dip. They almost crashed because no one was in control of it because they were all beating each other up. So they almost crashed, and they didn't know where they were, and they made it. They were scared to death that this plan wouldn't work, and then they noticed that they were running low on fuel. So they had to land at the first place that they could find, and then the clouds broke. And miraculously, they saw a tarmac. They saw a runway below them, and they were like, well, we gotta land here no matter where it is. And they knew that if they landed in Yugoslavia or Austria even would send them back, or Czechoslovakia or East Germany, they would have been sent straight back to Hungary. They would have been tortured by the AVH, and then they would have been executed as defectors. So they knew that if they were going to land, and it was not in a safe, free Western country, that they would be prepared to kill themselves. So they're headed for the runway, and then they see a Jeep with a machine gun mounted on it, and then they notice there's stars and stripes on the Jeep. They were in West Germany, and they were landing on a new NATO Air Force base that was being constructed. So when they land, they're taken to a hospital because they're all beaten and bruised, and then they're free. They weren't sent back as defectors, they were free. Hungarians had long been dreaming of freedom, and given that successful escape, they thought, well, maybe we can do it too. And then the revolution happened. And at the end of October, people started leaving like a little bit here and there because the revolution wasn't looking good at first. And then there were a few days where they thought that they had won. There was a ceasefire in place. The Soviets were leaving, they were evacuating, and they thought, oh, we've won. Like this has come out in our favor. The Soviets lied. They invaded again on November 4th, and around 4 or 5 in the morning, they attacked Budapest relentlessly. And as soon as they began attacking, people began leaving. Like early in the morning on November 4th, people started flooding out. And by the end of November, over 100,000 people had left. And then by the end of January of the next year, it would have been 200,000 people, like just about 200,000. And the Soviets, what's weird about it is they let people leave. They knew that people were leaving during the month of October and November, and they didn't start cracking down on the border until the end of November. And then they began shooting people. They put up guards everywhere. I mean, there were guards at the border the entire time, but there were a lot more people focusing on the revolution and like the battle than focusing on the border. And they just kind of ignored it for a little bit. And then the government cracked down on the refugees leaving and made it a lot harder for people to leave. But people left because of the revolution for up to a year afterwards. And the refugee crisis is a whole other thing. Like that is one of the most wild refugee crises. Crises. Yeah, I'm done.